In the 1963 March on Washington, King delivered his 17-minute speech, later known as "I Have a Dream," which has established a reputation as the top American speech of the 20th century. The March on Washington was mainly aiming to prove mass support of the Civil Rights Act proposed by Kennedy, that which consisted of three major amendments that empowered the black: abolishing slavery, giving them the right to vote, and granting those born in the U.S. the nationality. Leader in the African American civil rights movement and the youngest person ever awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, King advocated for an inclusive society, that which reflected his belief that all people are created equal.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
The speech had three main themes. The first being urgency.
Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time.
The second being dissatisfaction.
No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
And the final focused on the future.
I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
Repeating the phrase "I have a dream" more than 8 times, King portrayed a picture of a unified America, one he wished to see in the future. Harry Truman was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's vice president for 82 days before Roosevelt died in 1945, and Truman became the 33rd president of the United States.
The world was stunned.
It was quite a shock. Americans, the world, sort of held their breath to see what Truman would do.
He was really not that much of a national or worldly figure, so people were appalled. Everybody said, "Who is this man Truman? Woe is the nation, because we've got this ignoramus from Missouri who doesn't know anything about the world," and on and on and on. Well, he fooled them.
Truman was admired for his willingness to make politically controversial decisions that he thought were right, no matter how much it cost him in popular support.
One such decision confronted him almost immediately. After taking the oath, Truman was told for the first time about the Manhattan Project. This new president now faced the most consequential decision a president or any leader has ever had to make: the choice of dropping the first atomic bomb.
War raged on in Japan, and Truman was deeply contemplating whether or not he should use an atomic bomb against the Japanese as his first issue of foreign policy. In his agonizing decision-making, Truman concluded that by using this weapon, he could quickly end the war and minimize American casualties. Later, a committee appointed by the president supporting the use of the bomb. The first atomic bomb dropped was on the Japanese town Hiroshima. The bomb killed an estimate of 70,000 people and completely destroyed the city. 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki, killing an additional 39,000 people. Finally, on August 14th, Japan surrendered, and this marked the ending of the Second World War.
Although the war had ended, a new struggle was beginning. The United States versus the USSR, capitalism versus communism.
He gathers what we call the wise men, these great titans of foreign policy, to come help him figure out how to deal with the Soviet Union.
It was Harry Truman, George Marshall, and Dean Acheson who devised communist containment, the idea of containing the spread of communism, not trying to eliminate it militarily, waging a war of ideas in the confident belief that over time capitalism would prevail and Western democracy.
The policy of containment came to be known as the Truman Doctrine. It asserted America's right to support any nation in its struggle to fend off communist aggression. To rebuild war-ravaged Western Europe, Thought to be vulnerable to the communist threat, Truman put forward the Marshall Plan.
The United States government spent upwards of $12 to $14 billion in the reconstruction of Europe. And nearly everybody, historians, political scientists, contemporaries, judged the Marshall Plan a resounding success.
By advancing the Marshall Plan, the Truman Doctrine, and NATO, Truman hoped America would serve as a role model of democracy for the world.
The main issue in Nixon's doctrine was to implement different policies and improve the relations with China and the Soviet Union. He was the first president to visit China in February 1972 when he tried to encourage peace, the first signs that he wanted to achieve rapprochement between both countries. Nixon tried to work out an agreement with China in order to end the Vietnam War. It was in January 1973 that a peace treaty was signed. However, fighting resumed shortly after, and the communists were the ones who eventually won.
The Great Wall is no longer a wall dividing China from the rest of the world, but it is a reminder of the fact that there are many walls still existing in the world which divide nations and peoples. The Great Wall is also a reminder that for almost a generation there has been a wall between the People's Republic of China and the United States of America. In these past 4 days, we have begun the long process of removing that wall between us. You believe deeply in your system, and we believe just as deeply in our system. It is not our common beliefs that have brought us together here, but our common interests and our common hopes. The interest that each of us has to maintain our independence and the security of our peoples, and the hope that each of us has to build a new world order.
Nixon also improved relations with the Soviet Union by implementing a policy which became known as the Taunt. He wanted both parties to live together and accept one another, and believed that there was no point for a race of armaments. In spite of the fact that Nixon was against the interventionist policy, he was completely against communists coming to gain ground in Latin America, so he didn't shy away from organizing a CIA toppling down of Salvador Allende in Chile. By toppling down Allende, Nixon was intentionally sending a message to other Latin American countries that the US will not tolerate any communist president of a Latin American country, regardless of how they come to power.
I had no prior knowledge of the Watergate break-in. I neither took part in nor knew about any of the subsequent cover-up activity.
Carter acknowledged the importance of the Gulf area after the 1973 first oil embargo. His greatest achievement was his mediating role in the Camp David Accords.
Carter begged Sadat to stay, appealing to their friendship and mutual trust, and reminding him of Egypt's good relations with the United States. Sadat decided to remain at Camp David. Saturday, September 16th, Brzezinski wrote in his diary, "The president is driving himself mercilessly. He has single-handedly written the proposed document for the settlements on the Sinai." Carter presented the formula to Begin. At first, he called the demands on Israel excessive, political suicide. But in the end, he relented, agreeing to submit the question of the Jewish settlements to the Israeli parliament.
Jimmy Carter saw a picture of the three major participants on his desk, and he told his secretary to find out the names of Begin's grandchildren. And so then he wrote little notes Putting in the names of all the grandchildren, he went over to Begin and said, you know, this is not just for us, this is for our grandchildren, and let me give this to you. And Begin was profoundly moved by this.
The Camp David Accords were hailed as a monumental triumph of diplomacy. With his brilliant success and inspired leadership, Carter has taken a first big step toward realizing the promise of his presidency, was the verdict of the press.
Reagan started a new strategic defense that was the foundation of the arms control talks between the US and the Soviet Union. He followed Nixon's achievements to formulate his doctrine that was a shift in the US policy towards Soviets from containment to rollback. This rollback policy was considered an offensive one, given that Reagan felt that the Soviets were losing ground in Afghanistan.
Each member of the Congress has a role to play in modernizing our defenses, thus supporting our chances for a meaningful arms agreement.
Reagan wanted economic freedom and a good trade policy. His economic doctrine also opened the doors for capitalism in social countries.
America's economic success is freedom's success. It can be repeated 100 times in 100 different nations. Many countries in East Asia and the Pacific have few resources other than the enterprise of their own people. But through low tax rates and free markets, they've soared ahead of centralized economies. And now China is opening up its economy to meet its needs. We need a stronger and simpler approach to the process of making and implementing trade policy, and we'll be studying potential changes in that process in the next few weeks. We've seen the benefits of free trade and lived through the disasters of protectionism. Tonight, I ask all our trading partners, developed and developing alike, to join us in a new round of trade negotiations to expand trade and competition and strengthen the global economy, and to begin it in this next year.
Reagan's doctrine was a focal point of US foreign policy. It succeeded to bring down the USSR. Military intervention hit the highest point during Bush's time in presidency. He acted unilaterally, which meant that the US at the time was the sole superpower. His doctrine came after 9/11 when he launched his stand against terrorism. He promised to destroy and interfere even before there's a potential threat on the nation by adopting a proactive policy. Bush also attacked countries that he believed harbored terrorists.
Our enemy is a radical network of terrorists and every government that supports them. Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
Examples of his proactive policy is the attack on Iraq and Afghanistan. Invasion of Afghanistan was to topple off the Taliban regime that supported terrorism, and that of Iraq was to remove Saddam Hussein, since they thought Iraq had weapons of mass destruction.
The United States respects the people of Afghanistan. After all, we are currently its largest source of humanitarian aid, but we condemn the Taliban regime. It is not only repressing its own people, it is threatening people everywhere by sponsoring and sheltering and supplying terrorists. By aiding and abetting murder, the Taliban regime is committing murder.
When Barack Obama was a presidential candidate, he stated that he is an anti-doctrine candidate. Obama's aim was to create a strategy steering the US away from unilateralism, one that included cooperation and emphasized engagement. Evidently, he tried to work closer with Iran in order to achieve multilateralism. Furthermore, Obama was not for military intervention and wanted to withdraw from Iraq and Afghanistan. Obama doesn't view Muslims as terrorists. An example of this is his speech in Cairo in 2009, where he addressed the issue of mending the US relations with the Muslim world.
I've come here to Cairo to seek a new beginning, between the United States and Muslims around the world, one based on mutual interest and mutual respect.
You know, the likelihood.
Human rights activist Hussam Behgat was in the audience in Cairo University in June 2009.
There was the promise of something new and something different, and there was a degree also of acknowledging, past mistakes and past injustices.
So much happening here that it's difficult.
Also present was publisher and civil society activist Hisham Qasim.
Everybody was thrilled with Obama. I'm not as engaged or following closely.
But Qasim was skeptical. Behind the soaring rhetoric, he felt there was little substance.
It's okay to say a new beginning because, but a beginning of what exactly, that was not clear. And what evolved from it, very little.
The TRIPS requires the members of the WTO to provide copyrights, geographical indications, industrial designs, patents, trademarks, and undisclosed information regarding trade secrets. Copyrights provide protection to literary and artistic works. They are included in the Berne Convention, which governs property rights. The TRIPS also provides protection known as neighboring rights, which protect the rights of those involved in various works of art. Computer software programs are considered literary works and are therefore protected against copying. That being said, TRIPS allows for reverse engineering in order to understand aspects of existing software and develop new ones. This inclusion of computer software and granting it the same protection as literary and artistic works is one of the TRIPS' most important enforcements. Patents provide the right to inventions. Under the TRIPS agreement, an invention must be new, involve an inventive step, and be capable of industrial application for it to become registered as a patent. Patents can be granted to both products and processes.